All right, so today I want to start by talking about this tweet from Pierre Poilievre, and he says the Trudeau government lost track of 20,000 infrastructure projects. Now they want to run your drug plan, daycare, and retirement home. What could possibly go wrong? Now, this is something I've been talking about for a long time, and anything the government runs, it's not going to be as good as if it's in the private sector. There may be some exception that someone can think up, but for 99% of things, when the government runs something, it won't be as good as the private sector. In what ways? It will be more expensive. It'll take longer. It'll have more problems. It'll have more this. It'll have more that. For the simple reason that the government has no incentive to. I mean, when it comes to healthcare, what incentive do they have to provide healthcare in a very timely manner? I mean, if there's no private option, then what incentive do they have? And this is the thing too when it comes to healthcare is there's like in Canada, you at least right now, I believe it's in the Supreme Court, but you can't have private competition, right? So what incentive do they have to improve when they have a monopoly? And this is the thing the left who argues that you can't have a full on free market because one company will gain a monopoly in whatever sector and they'll abuse it, but yet they could care less when the government has a monopoly and they abuse it, right? Like it's absolutely insane that they can argue with a straight face for that. Not to mention too, we have plenty of examples of the government completely mismanaging things, and not to mention too, it's usually the left that defend said monopolies, right? Like Google pretty much has a de facto monopoly, but the vast majority and the people on the left could care less about trying to break that up because they benefit them, right? Because they're very left wing. So this idea that they care about that's absolutely insane. But again, the main point being is that the government is terrible at running these things because they have no incentive to do them. That is how humans work. The more of an incentive you have to do something, the more likely you're going to be able to do it or to do it. And the less of an incentive you have, the less likely you are to be able to do it. And again, on the flip side too, what happens when one of these government programs goes bad? What is always the excuse? You know, and I'll give you an example. Public school system is underperforming. What is the solution always, especially these left-wing people? It's they need more money. It's always they need more money, right? So again, they have no incentive to do a better job because if they don't do a good job, most people are just going to say, "Oh, they need more money." Right? It's never, for at least for most people, it's never we need private competition. That's never what most people say. That is the actual answer of what it should be, but that's not what most people say. So again, it's just pure insanity to expect the government to run something. And again, I don't care what side they're on either. Like, I don't care if it's a conservative government, a liberal government, an NDP. I don't care who it is. I want the government running the least amount of things possible. So anyway, the next thing's from David Jensen here on Twitter. And he says, for the week of September 6th to 12th, 2020, there were 27, deaths in Canada. In an average week, there are 5,500 deaths from all causes in Canada. Now, again, I believe the numbers have ticked up slightly since then, but nonetheless, this whole virus situation, it still should be an afterthought. Even though the cases have gone way up, mainly in Ontario and Quebec, but a little bit in Alberta and BC as well. It's maybe in very specific areas of Ontario and Quebec because again, even though the numbers province wide are up, it's still in very select areas, right? It's still in very select areas. So for 99% of Canadians, the whole what situation should be a complete afterthought. It should be a complete afterthought. But because the government and the mainstream media is blowing it out of proportion, it isn't, right? Like again, like you have 5,500 people a week die, and we had 27 die from this. Like, are you insane? It's just pure insanity to be actually worried and still worried about this kind of stuff. And the fact that you read through some of these, social media threads and you have people that are genuinely still paranoid about this. It's like, what planet do you live on, people? Like, seriously, like, what planet do you live on? And I understand their point of view, too. Like, this is the thing, too. Whenever you try and talk to these people, they always come at it from a perspective of you don't understand their point of view, when in reality it's the exact opposite, right? Like I could again, when it comes to these kind of things, I could argue from their point of view better than they can. The problem is that they literally have never heard the other side of the spectrum, let alone actually understand what they're trying to get at, right? So the next thing I wanted to bring up is a BLM activist about a week ago, um, after the whole Breonna Taylor ruling, yeah, went and killed 3 people in Louisville again. Like, and the point I wanted to get at here is when is this going to stop, or when are people going to be like, hey, this has gone too far? Like seriously, like when are we going to say that? Like, and here's the thing: the reason why it really bothers me is that I think we're going to reach a massive tipping point before they do that. Now again, I know this is something that's pretty much exclusively a problem in the States, but in Canada, we also have a government that's pushing, racism is this massive issue and systemic racism, this systemic racism, that, even though they can't come up with an actual example of it aside from purely anecdotal stuff. Um, in Canada, we're pushing it every bit as hard as the Democrats and these lefties are in the States. So it's not, I mean, the violence is pretty much exclusively a American thing, but this push, of the intersectionality cult that is BLM and, critical race theory and systemic racism and all these people buying into that, the cult is every bit as alive and well in Canada as it is in the States, right? And not to mention, too, at the federal level, the government in the States is pretty vehemently against it, and in Canada, we're pretty vehemently in favor of it. So again, it's a little different. So yeah, and this is the thing too. Like when it comes to this kind of stuff, is how many people need to die before people question it? Like seriously, and by people, I mean the majority of the population. I understand in fact, I do think it's a majority of the population, but at what point will that very vocal minority of people question their worldview? I guess is a better way of putting it. Like at what point? Now, the big problem I have is I think that there's going to have to be thousands, maybe tens of thousands die before that happens, right? So the craziness continues nonetheless. The next thing I wanted to bring up is from James Woods, and he responds to a tweet saying Texas has more acres of forest than California and currently 0 fires. Same global climate. Now it is slightly different climate, but it is pretty similar. And James Woods says, oh, here's something you didn't hear on CNN. Now, this is something that's being pushed a lot in Canada as well. I mean, we don't have nearly as many forest fires as they do in the States. No, they are slowing down in the States, given it's going to be consistently getting colder and colder as time goes on. Now that we're almost in October, but nonetheless, they're blaming it on climate change. I mean, and the big thing too is that in Canada we have a government that's full on climate alarmist, right? So the reason I wanted to bring this up is I don't think this has anything to do with, even if you want to talk about how climate change is a real thing, this has nothing to do with climate change, right? It clearly doesn't, considering the fact that many of these fires are clearly arson. There's been tons of people arrested for setting fires or attempting to set fires. And given the fact that there's a lot of other questions, when it comes to this kind of stuff, I don't believe it. And here's the other thing too we know. Um, Forest fires have been an issue for as long. I mean, you have documented history of lots of forest fires in California going back to like the 1850s, 1860s, right? So this idea that forest fires are a only a modern phenomenon is it's complete bunk. Like it's complete bunk. So that's the other thing I wanted to bring up. Number one being they're not climate change. I mean, a lot of them are clearly arson. And number two, even if you want to argue that they aren't arson and it is climate change, then you still can't explain for the whole fact that forest fires have been around for the entirety of history, at least documented history, right? So, yeah, that's the last thing I wanted to bring up. So if you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you follow me on Twitter mainly, but also BitChute and Parler. All those links are in the description, so you can find them all there.